Can you exercise with a rotator cuff injury? If you are a fairly active person and you have a shoulder injury or you've been diagnosed with a rotator cuff injury, you may find that it really cramps your style. And you may want to know what exercises are safe to do with a rotator cuff injury, what exercises you should avoid, and what exercises can help you recover from your rotator cuff injury faster. Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Candy, and in this video, I'm going to cover those topics of what exercises you can and probably should not do with a rotator cuff injury, and how you can get your rotator cuff injury to heal a little bit faster. Now, if you find this video helpful, give it a like or thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you can get notified of our future videos. Now, first of all, what exercises can you do safely with a rotator cuff injury? If you've got a rotator cuff injury, there are certain exercises that are always safe. There are certain exercises that are sometimes okay, and then certain exercises that you should probably just avoid completely. So let's start with the ones that are always safe to do if you have a rotator cuff injury. First of all, lower body cardiovascular exercises like walking and biking are pretty much always safe to do, particularly if it's a stationary bike where you don't have to hang on with your hands and you're not going to fall off. Those really aren't going to bother your rotator cuff injury, and they're actually going to help increase blood flow throughout your body so that you get more blood flow, more oxygen, more nutrients to your shoulder, and it'll actually kind of help the healing process. Additionally, lower body strength training exercises such as leg press or leg extensions or leg curls where you're on a machine, as long as you're not really bearing down or going super heavy and gripping on hard with your arms, those are also always okay to do. Now, other lower body cardiovascular exercises like running or things where you have a lot of high impact, or if you're having to hold on to a bar, say like if you're doing squats with a bar, those may fall in the sometimes category. It really depends on how bad your rotator cuff injury is. But just general lower body exercise is actually good for your shoulder because it helps you stay active, helps keep you motivated, helps keep you from getting depressed, and it increases circulation to your whole body so your rotator cuff injury can heal a little bit faster. So next on to those sometimes things. And some of those I already mentioned, like running. If that jarring doesn't really bother your shoulder, if it's just a very mild rotator cuff injury, then that's fine to do. It's kind of an as tolerated type of exercise. Same with arm exercises. Exercises where you go like this, just bicep curls. Sometimes those will bother people. Your bicep tendon actually attaches to your shoulder, and you have to use a little bit of your rotator cuff muscles just to stabilize the arm. But if you can do light bicep curls comfortably and it doesn't bother your shoulder, those are absolutely fine to do with a rotator cuff injury. Other exercises like tricep pushdowns kind of fall in that same category. Most upper body strengthening exercises fall into the as tolerated category. It really depends on how irritable and how severe your rotator cuff injury is. Now, there are certain upper body strength training exercises that you should pretty much almost always avoid if you have a rotator cuff injury. And those are things where you're raising your arms in an internally rotated position like that, where your elbows are going up first above your wrist. And that really puts your shoulder in an impingement position where you're going to pinch the rotator cuff tendons. Your shoulder is like a ball and socket joint, but it's not a perfectly round ball. There's bumps on different parts of that ball, and depending on which way you orient your arm, you can either move the bumps under the arch of the shoulder where you're more likely to pinch your rotator cuff, or if you're externally rotated, turned out like that, move the bumps where they're not going to pinch the rotator cuff. So exercises like upright rows. Those are just generally not a great exercise for most people, even if you don't have a rotator cuff injury, because it can put you at risk for one. Now, if you're a CrossFitter or an Olympic weightlifter and you do like power cleans or things like that, if you have good technique and good flexibility in your shoulders, they're okay to do every now and then. But if you've got a pre-existing rotator cuff injury, things where you lift up like an upright row or a clean type position are probably not really good to do. Other things like lateral raises, particularly where you have your thumb down or where your elbows are bent and you're kind of coming in that way, are also probably not really good exercises to do. Instead, you want to kind of go thumbs up in a diagonal position like that, where your shoulder is in a better position, and that'll help you not pinch the rotator cuff tendons so much. Overhead presses, that kind of falls back in the sometimes category, that if it's a mild rotator cuff injury and you're using light weights and you can go up and keep your shoulders externally rotated and not pinch the shoulder, then you're fine to do that. But a lot of people will have trouble doing overhead movements if they already have a rotator cuff injury. And so those are things that are probably more of a usually to avoid. Things like bench presses, those kind of fall into that usually to avoid category, because you do need to use your rotator cuff to stabilize quite a bit. And if you already have an injury, you don't want it to tear and end up dropping the weight on yourself. If you've got a machine where you can kind of limit your range, it's like a pulley machine that has a weight stack, and you can kind of limit your weight and limit the range of motion that you go in, or using some light dumbbells and limiting the range of motion to a comfortable range. That can make it a little bit safer. But just a standard bench press where your elbows go all the way back behind you and the bar comes down to your chest is probably one usually to avoid if you have a rotator cuff injury. So those are kind of the three categories of just general exercises. But if you've got a rotator cuff injury already, you may wonder, what exercises can I do to help my rotator cuff recover quicker? And those generally kind of fall into two categories. One of them is strengthening exercises, and the other one is stretching exercises. Now, if you've ever been to physical therapy or known anyone who's been to physical therapy for a rotator cuff injury, you've probably seen an exercise with bands where you kind of go in and out like that. And what you'll do with that exercise is you'll grab onto one end of a band, it's attached to a door or some other stationary object, and you go out like that, or turn for the other shoulder, you'd pull in that way, doing an internal rotation. Now, those are okay exercises. You probably see them mostly everywhere, but there are a couple reasons that we don't use those that much here at More for Life. And the reason for that is they're really not that functional. How often is it that you actually do this type of motion in an everyday situation? Unless you're a bus driver who's opening and closing a door all day long, or if you are, like a tennis player or ping pong or pickleball or whatever you play, you may do that motion a little bit, but largely that isolated in and out motion is not a motion that we tend to do a lot in everyday life. So for that reason, we usually don't do that exercise. It's not bad, it just isn't the best. But if you are to do that exercise, you want to make sure, one, that you have a towel and you put it underneath your arm there. It keeps your shoulder in a little better position. And you also want to make sure that you're doing it just with your arm, that your shoulder blade's not moving in and out wildly like that. It should be isolated to just your shoulder and just doing rotations at the arm. And that makes it a better isolated exercise for your rotator cuff. But again, probably other ways that you can exercise your rotator cuff that are a little bit more functional. Same thing for the other exercise. You still want to have a towel or something underneath your arm on this side and just isolate the movement there. For most people, this is a pretty easy movement to do with a band. You've got big, strong muscles that bring you in that way, and a lot of people will compensate, but it's an easy movement to do with a band where you're just kind of rotating back and forth like that, and it's not a great exercise. So there are other more functional exercises that you can do to strengthen your rotator cuff in everyday motions, such as reaching overhead. Again, you don't want to go into that internally rotated position, so if you keep your arms externally rotated while reaching up, that's a little bit more functional of an exercise. And I've got some other videos that I can link to that show you other ways that you can strengthen your rotator cuff and prevent shoulder pain in more functional movement patterns, such as reaching up above your head or reaching behind your back. Now, what about the stretching exercises? What stretches are good for your rotator cuff? And largely there are two main ones that I think are really, really important, maybe three. The first one is the stretch for your posterior rotator cuff. That again, your shoulder is like a ball and socket joint. And if that ball is too far forward in the socket, it can pinch the rotator cuff tendons and get them irritable. Now, if the back part of your shoulder, if the back rotator cuff muscles are too stiff, they will actually push the ball forward in the socket. So you need those muscles to be flexible, not just strong, but you need them to be flexible enough to allow the ball to stay centered in the socket as you move. So I can link to a video called the sleeper stretch. It's a little bit different than the standard sleeper stretch, but you'll see some tips that we use to make that even better, and I'll link out to that video. Now, the other exercises actually aren't your shoulder at all. They actually have more to do with your pec muscles or pectoral muscles and your lat muscles. So that affects how your shoulder blade moves. And if your pec muscles are really tight, they bring it into a down and forward position like that, brings the arch of the shoulder down, and makes you more likely to pinch the rotator cuff muscles. So if you have stiff, short pecs, there are some other exercises you can do to stretch out your chest muscles, and I'll link to a different video for that because this setting isn't really good to show that. But I'll demonstrate that in another video. And then the other one is your lat muscles. These muscles, kind of your wing-like muscles back there, they limit how much your shoulder blades can move up and over your head. And your shoulder blades do actually kind of need to go up like that as you reach upwards so that you don't pinch your rotator cuff muscles under the arch of the shoulder. And again, I'll link out to another video that shows you how to stretch your lats. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you do, give it a like or thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you can get notified of our other future videos. And if you do need some more help for a rotator cuff injury or some other type of shoulder pain, just give us a call here at More for Life and we'd be happy to help you out. Thanks for listening and have a great day.